A big part of my career has been looking at the therapeutic value of the 12 steps, because the 12 steps really have harnessed some powerful psychological forces that creates an amazing change in our life. What is that change? Well, the truth is that the 12 steps are engineered to help us achieve emotional sobriety, to achieve true independence of spirit, to achieve autonomy, to learn how to take care of ourselves. These are things that we don't know. Emotional sobriety really helps us learn how to have a healthy relationship, how to have union with the preservation of our integrity, how to cooperate with integrity. Most of us get lost in our relationships. Most of us do a lot of things we don't want to do. We don't really know how to show up in a good way. Emotional sobriety is about learning to have healthy relationships. We are on this chapter of accepting what is. And that sounds so simple, accepting what is, right? Accepting what is, 3 words. But those 3 words may be the hardest 3 words to integrate into our life and into our consciousness at an emotional and intellectual level for a lot of different reasons. We've been exploring acceptance now for the past 4 weeks, and tonight, what I wanted to do was I want to read to you from the book about this session I had with Charlene, because it was probably one of the most powerful experiences I've ever had as a psychotherapist. And so I want to read to you, and then I want to narrate some of this and talk to you about some things that weren't included in the book. So that's what we're doing tonight. So probably I would encourage you to get a box of tissues, because if you don't use them, I will as we go through this, because this is pretty heavy stuff tonight. So Charlene was divorced and shared custody of a beautiful little girl whose name was Emily. Charlene had a solid 6 years of sobriety and came to me for therapy at various points when she felt her recovery was threatened. You know, I like to think of those moments as recovery checkups, is that we can check in with someone that we really trust and feel that they can offer us something to sweeten the pot, so to speak, and help us, you know, improve our recovery. As I say, you don't have to be sick to get better. So she would come and see me at various points. One thing that stood out with Charlene was the incredible relationship she developed with her daughter, Emily. Charlene was a wonderful parent, and she worked hard at it. One of the pleasures of working with Charlene was the stories that she told about Emily. And over the years, I began to develop a sense of this lovely girl. Emily brought Charlene so much joy. The two of them made a tight-knit family. Charlene loved to sing and had thought of becoming a professional vocalist. Emily already seemed prepared to follow her mom by dancing and playing guitar. Together, the two of them spent many evenings after work and school learning new songs, working on harmonies, and recording themselves. Sure, Emily and her mom fought, the way all mothers and adolescent daughters fight, but they were as close as a team could be. The relationship was strong, their bond was impressive and quite secure. Then one day, Emily started complaining of a pain in her back. Testing revealed a tumor on her right kidney. It was biopsied and found to be malignant. Well, it's not in the book, but you can understand how hearing that about your daughter just devastated Charlene, her mom. You know, she was just, you know, besides herself with pain and grief and anxiety about what was going to happen. The doctors removed the tumor in the kidney and then started very aggressive radiation treatment to prevent the cancer from growing in Emily's remaining kidney. Emily did great for some months. It was during this time that Charlene began seeing me regularly again. She told me her recovery program felt shaky and she needed emotional support. You know, we talk about that recovery is really tested when it would make more sense for us to drink or use than to stay sober. And Charlene really wanted to stay sober and be there for her daughter because she knew her daughter was really going to need her. But this was a very difficult task that was set before Charlene and that life set before her. Within a month, she had secured better footing. Her daughter's steady improvement helped solidify Charlene's ground. It looked like things would be okay. Then the earthquake struck. Emily's cancer was back, a malignant tumor on her remaining kidney. She was not a candidate for a transplant. There was nothing the doctors could do, and nothing Charlene could do to save her daughter's life. Now, I can't think of anything more painful for a person than to watch their child be so sick and be dying from whatever illness they have and feel so helpless to do something about it. And this was the experience that Charlene was having in her life. By this time, I was meeting with Charlene several times a week to provide her with emotional support. She was devastated. The cruelty of this situation was unfathomable. I wept alongside Charlene multiple times. Emily was a gift to her mother and the world, and now she was losing her. And there was nothing she could do. Charlene was reeling. She wanted to drink, but didn't. It wasn't easy. Nights were the worst. She had slept at the hospital next to her daughter almost every night and cried herself to sleep most of the time. The conversations with her daughter had been powerful and poignant. This was one of those times in every alcoholic's recovery when they'd like to drink, if only to numb the pain. Sometimes sobriety is about not drinking when it makes more sense to pick up a drink. In addition to her, well, let me tell you what her daughter would ask her while she was sitting there. She would ask her things like, Mom, what's going to happen to me when I die? Will I ever see you again? How painful is it going to be when I leave this world? I mean, can you imagine talking to your daughter about those things as she's lying there dying from this cancer? I can't. They were devastating. Charlene was just in so much pain. To sit there and see the depths of the questions that this beautiful little girl was having about life and death. In addition to her regular meetings with me to process the pain she was experiencing, Charlene was also attending 3 AA meetings a week. Still, she struggled. And the main question she came back to again and again was, how could I possibly live in a world that is so cruel and unfair? What is the point of sobriety? What is the point of life? In a world like this, is there any path out of this dismal desert that I find myself in? Indeed, Charlene's questions are ones that we all face. There are times when it seems there is no sense in the world. As a former patient of mine used to say, life sucks and then you die. The difficulty, the unfairness, the injustice, the cruelty, and the harshness of life can crush any of us. It was crushing Charlene. She was in full-blown existential crisis. The foundation of her life was shattered. Her purpose in life was being ripped out of her heart. She wondered why she should keep living if there is no hope. This isn't the way life should be, she would tell me, as the tears would streak down her cheeks. I shouldn't be dealing with my daughter's death. She should have to deal with mine. I shouldn't have to bury my daughter. How can life be worth living if it doesn't meet any of these expectations or any of my expectations? She was losing hope as fast as her daughter was losing her life. There was an answer to the questions that were emerging from the grief and pain and trauma she was experiencing. but it would take some effort to discover it. Now, ponder that for a minute. There was an answer. There was going to be some kind of wisdom that would eventually emerge from this. But at this phase, you can't count on that when you're going through something like this. At this phase, you cannot see it when you're experiencing a situation like this. But it's important for us to keep in mind that if we stay connected to the experience we're having and we process it and metabolize it in a good way, there will be some wisdom garnished at some point from that experience. She couldn't see that yet. One of the most frequently cited pages from the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous is on page 417. The phrase that is used when quoting this page is acceptance is the key to our recovery. I think every one of you that have been to a meeting have heard that. Let's explore its content. And here's a quote from the book. Acceptance is the answer to all my problems. This was Dr. Paul who wrote this. Acceptance is the answer to all my problems today. When I am disturbed, it is because I find some person, place, thing, or situation, some fact of my life, and I'm adding this, some reality of life, unacceptable to me. And I can find no serenity until I accept that person, place, thing, or situation as being exactly the way it is supposed to be at this moment. Nothing, absolutely nothing, happens in God's world by mistake. Until I could accept my alcoholism, I could not stay sober. Until I accept life completely on life's terms, I cannot be happy. I need to concentrate not so much on what needs to be changed in the world as on what needs to be changed in me and my attitudes. There's a lot of wisdom in this passage from the Big Book, which explains why it is so widely cited in the 12-step meetings. This passage has helped many people in recovery come to grips with life, thus beginning the journey of emotional sobriety. But the passage is not perfect. Indeed, it did not help Charlene, and not because she wasn't working a good program. She was. She attended at least 3 meetings a week, checked in with her sponsor, and was in therapy. We're going to explore the page 417 and the problems in this chapter, but first, let's look at the notion of acceptance. So, I want to talk to you about that chapter. Now, can you imagine what happened when people would come up to Charlene after she would share in a meeting about the pain and grief she was experiencing, and they would tell her things like, nothing happens in God's world, that's not a mistake. Now, just put yourself in her shoes. Try to have empathy for this woman for a minute. Can you in any way imagine that this could be soothing? Because it wasn't. What Charlene would say when people would come up and tell her that is, I don't want that kind of a God in my life. If a God's world is to take away my lovely little daughter and have her suffer so much, I don't know what kind of God that is, but it's not a God that I want in my life. I can't accept your God. That doesn't help me. And then she would be criticized she's not working a good program. I mean, think of that for a minute in terms of the alienation that could create in Charlene from going to meetings. Now, there was a part of her that knew that they were coming to her with good intentions, but sometimes the road to hell is paved with good intentions, and that's what they were doing right now. They were paving that road because this wasn't helpful at all to Charlene. And I think you guys can see why. So we got to be very thoughtful when we share something with someone that we think is going to be helpful, meaning that we have to put ourselves in that person's shoes and just take a moment to have empathy about how that's going to land on them, how they're going to experience something like that when they're in such a state of pain and grief and suffering. I'm not going to read you that section, but I think it's a very important section where I talk about, and maybe next time we'll maybe extend this 1 week and we'll read that section because I think it's a very important section. But I want to go back to Charlene, her work. Okay. So growing towards acceptance. This is on page 156 if you're following me. Earlier, I said that acceptance was one of the big ideas in recovery, and it really is. It really brought acceptance to the foreground. There is a natural connection between self-acceptance, learning to accept our true self as we are, learning to accept reality as it is, and learning to accept the world as it is. And the world as it never fits our expectations. That's the hard challenge, is accepting the world that doesn't fit our expectations. And you could see how hard that would be for Charlene. That's a tough lesson because a part of us always clings to the idea that the world will magically solve our problems. That is a part of us refuses to grapple with reality. However, our wise self knows that the world does not belong to us. It knows that our expectations do not fit reality. When we are not aligned with reality, we will experience internal conflict. We will be in a civil war with ourselves. We will be in a war with reality. Reality will always win, by the way. We will try to control something that is not in our power to control. We cannot alter reality to meet our expectations, but this doesn't stop us from trying. We cannot negotiate with reality, but this doesn't stop us from negotiating. We cannot force reality to bend to our will, but this doesn't stop us from trying to force it. Because we do. But at some point, reality forces our hand. We are forced into acceptance. If we stay connected and don't run away. And this is the critical point I want to make about emotional sobriety. The way we grow ourselves is to stay connected to painful situations and try to add more of ourselves to that situation. You're going to hear me pounding on that drum throughout one of my presentations and throughout this book. Acceptance aligns us with reality of the situation we are facing. When we are aligned with reality, we can discover new possibilities and paths. Sometimes we'll cover something we'll cover later on in an upcoming chapter. Nathaniel Branden acknowledged the key role acceptance plays in making any change. I cannot overcome a fear whose reality I deny. I cannot correct a problem in a way I deal with my associates if I will not admit it exists. I cannot accept traits I insist I do not have. I cannot forgive myself for an action I will not acknowledge I have taken. If we accept the situation we are in and we let the situation inform our actions, we learn to cope with life. This is where we left Charlene. She had found herself in an untenable situation with her daughter's medical condition. Her reality had suffered an earthquake. More than shaken, the very ground had fallen from beneath her feet, and her AA group wasn't helping. And if anything, it was making things worse. She was not feeling support from that group. Remember when we left Charlene, she was struggling with a horrible dilemma. How could I possibly live in a world that is so cruel and unfair? What is the point of sobriety? What is the point of life in a world like this? Is there any path out of this dismal desert? Charlene brought these questions forward as we met over the period that her daughter was dying. Week after week we met. She was struggling to find any sort of hope in her life. Her grief sat in the room like a third person, heavy, dark, immovable, and she was incredibly angry. One session, I asked her how her AA meetings were going. It was then she really exploded. They keep throwing page 417 in my face and I can't buy it. I'm not going back. Acceptance, I asked? Yes, she said, fucking acceptance. That's a well-marked passage in a copy of my big book, I said. What upset you about it in that meeting? Charlene sighed, closed her eyes, and tilted her head up, reciting the second section from memory. Nothing, absolutely nothing happens in God's world by mistake. I'm sure Charlene snarls that they mean well. They deliver it in the most soothing tones as though they understand, but they don't understand, not at all. What do you mean? I asked her. She exploded. How in the hell is it soothing to say nothing happens in God's world by mistake when my daughter is dying from cancer? How is that going to help me cope with this nightmare? Are they out of their fucking minds? I often ask clients who ask questions to convert their questions into statements. When I asked this of Charlene, here's what she said. They are out of their fucking minds. So she changed her question into a statement because questions hide statements. They are out of their fucking minds. They have no idea of what I am experiencing or what it is like to sit with your daughter, your 12-year-old daughter who asks what is going to happen to her body after she dies. They are ignorant, and I don't buy this concept that nothing happens in God's world by mistake. This is a big fucking mistake, and it is happening in their God's world. If I were a minister to live in a homily, this might be the point where I could provide some sort of helpful, comforting answer to Charlene's dilemma. But I am not. I am a therapist who has lived his own tragedies and has been present for the tragedies of many others. And I knew there was nothing I could say that would soothe Charlene. Charlene needed to grieve. She needed to give full expression to all of her feelings, including her rage. She needed to repair herself, and the mechanism to do that resided deep inside of her, buried underneath mountains of pain and unreasonable expectations. We set out an excavation to help her unearth the parts of her that could help her integrate this traumatic experience. I invited her to put the AA group in an empty chair and give the group members a piece of her mind. Well, she jumped at the opportunity. She gave them as much more of a piece of her mind. She gave them much more than a piece of her mind that late afternoon. She started out saying that she recognized that they were trying to help her, but then she let them have it. How can you tell me that God doesn't make a mistake when my daughter is in the hospital dying? She's an innocent child who is being ravaged by cancer. She didn't do anything to deserve this pain and suffering. And you tell me that this is God's will? Fuck your God that would do this to my daughter, and for you to even present me with this cruel idea. You're not helping me. You're making me feel even more alone in this crisis. With that last statement, she collapsed into tears. God, I remember that. It's like it's happening right now. They poured forth from some place deep inside of her suffering. An inexpressible pain was voiced only in sobs. There were no words that could capture the amount of pain that this poor woman was feeling. If I can't see the words. This was Charlene's brutal path to acceptance. She needed to discover or uncover the words and sounds that reflected the outrage and the horror of the experience both she and her daughter were going through. This is what her therapy consisted of while her daughter was in the hospital and after she passed away. Charlene needed to feel and express her pain, her outrage, her loss, and her objection to the whole motherfucking thing, as she called it. In one of our sessions, I encouraged her to have it out with God. The dialogue was quite powerful. We put God in the empty chair. After raging about what she felt was God's betrayal, she came to an important realization. For Charlene, the bottom line was that she had the idea that God was supposed to be someone who would protect her and her family, especially from the kind of experiences she was currently having. She smiled as she made this claim out loud. She goes, "What a ridiculous expectation. I really set myself up with that one, didn't I?" I smiled in agreement. One day, Charlene came into our session with her own idea of who needed to go in the chair. She wanted a dialogue with the cancer that was killing her daughter. I immediately commented on what a wonderful idea this was, and so she did it. She tore into that cancer like an angry mother bear defending its cubs. I hate you. I hate what you are doing to my daughter. How dare you invade my precious little girl? You're a fucking monster, she said. But this wasn't enough. She needed to use her whole self to express these feelings. I handed her a rolled up towel. Roger taught me how to do that, by the way, how to roll up a towel and use it to bang on a chair. I handed her a rolled up towel to wallop the cancer, and she attacked that chair with every swat. She yelled, I hate you, leave my daughter alone. Over and over again, she hit and shouted. This must have gone on for a good half of an hour. Finally, she collapsed in a state of exhaustion. But I sensed that with each swing of the towel, she inched a little closer to acceptance. I want to remind you that acceptance is something we do. What Charlene was doing was actually helping her move closer to accepting the unacceptable, the unimaginable, the unbearable. How was she moving closer to acceptance? By owning her truth. By experiencing her rage, her outrage, her pain, her fears, and by declaring her truth. Sometimes acceptance is born out of a paradox. We declare we won't accept the situation as it is. We declare our lack of acceptance. And when we do that, we are actually moving closer to acceptance. This was Charlene's path. At certain times, I would present her with a sentence completion task like, I will not accept what is happening, or it's impossible to accept this because it means, and then she would fill in the blank, and here are some of her completions. It means that my life will never be the same. It means that I will never be certain of anything ever again. I will feel that life is so fragile that I have no control, that I will no longer be able to hold my precious Emily in my arms. That life isn't fair, that God sucks, that I'll be alone, that there is a danger lurking everywhere in life. We can get a sense of the effect that this was having on Charlene's worldview. It was shattered. As Fritz Perls stated, suffering or death is not easy, and Charlene was dying. A lot of her beliefs were dying. But until Charlene let her beliefs or worldview be totally shattered, there wouldn't be room for a better, stronger foundation in her life. This is what Charlene was building, a new, healthier foundation for her life, one that was better aligned with reality. She was doing with this without being aware of it. You see, sometimes we change in therapy without realizing how we're changing. We can't see it until we get some distance from it. Dr. Viktor Frankl, an author of the popular important book Man's Search for Meaning, understood the powerful transformation that takes place when we accept the reality of the situation we are in. He pointed out the way in which a man accepts his faith and all the suffering it entails, the way in which he takes up his cross, gives him ample opportunity, even under the most difficult circumstances, to add deeper meaning to his life. See, that's the wisdom that can emerge out of such a painful experience that she had. He drew this conclusion from experiences he had as a Nazi concentration camp prisoner and from observations he made of other prisoners and their reactions to the abhorrent reality they all faced on a daily basis. Well, if men and women in a Nazi death camp could face the reality of situations as difficult and demanding as they experienced on a daily basis, then it seems possible for you and I, and even for Charlene, to accept whatever challenging and painful situations we are facing. In therapy, Charlene realized she had an unconscious expectation that God was supposed to protect her. That came from her childhood, by the way. This is what made her so outraged by the idea that in God's world, there are no mistakes. Remember what Bill Wilson suggested, that every time we're upset, regardless of the cause, there is something wrong with us. I like to say something off with us. In this case, Charlene had the expectation that God should protect her daughter, Emily, and God was not. Her reality did not conform to her expectations. Remember, when we fight reality, we lose. Once she realized her unconscious expectation and faced it, she was able to surrender it. This helped her grow towards acceptance. It was a slow process, a very complicated and traumatic bereavement. Loss associated with trauma is much more difficult to process and accept than any other type of loss, but it is possible with help. It is where I would like to discuss, well, the major problem with 417, and I talked about that. Allow me to summarize some of this. The expectation of fairness is a major way we resist acceptance. Resistance to acceptance generally comes from the idea that what is happening is not supposed to be happening. This means we have an expectation that life should conform to our expectations that we think it should be. We idealize what life should be like, and when it doesn't live up to our expectations, we object. The should is very strong in every person's idealized life or idealized reality or idealized fantasy. It is at the heart of the problem of acceptance. This expectation was generated by our deep unconscious desire for our life to reverse the experiences of our past. On a fundamental level, we are all exposed and terrified of the unfairness of life. This is an existential dilemma that we all face. This sets us up to try to create an adult life that reverses the unfairness that we experienced during childhood, whether those unfairnesses were naturally occurring or caused by others around us. Unfair past equals, the formula we have is simple. Unfair past should equal a fair future. That's one big should. Unfortunately, life doesn't work this way. Charlene had to rage against the reality of her situation. She needed to object until she came out the other side. The other side is acceptance. When we achieve acceptance, we unleash an incredible force within us. We are hardwired to integrate experiences so they become contributors to our integrity, to our wholeness, to our lives. This force is known as self-actualization, and it actually operates outside of our awareness. Once Charlene reached acceptance, she integrated the terrible experience of losing her daughter into her person. Believing her experience could be of value to others who were forced to experience an unthinkable traumatic event like she did, she decided to go back to school and become a therapist. She converted her deep wound into a sacred wound. The way she carried her cross brought deeper meaning to her life. Charlene found emotional freedom. She achieved emotional sobriety. Oh boy. And of course, I forgot my box of Kleenex. Anybody can share a Kleenex with me, please? Well, I don't think I have anything else to say right now. I'm quite spent. So let me ask Roger and Thom to join us and see what they'd like to say about this situation.
Well, I'll start. First of all, my heart goes out to you, Alan. I mean, you sat through all of these hours and hours and hours of sessions with this woman, and obviously you were very connected to her and you cared a lot about her and her daughter. I think also you're dealing with a lot right now in terms of the leg fracture that you mentioned, and so I appreciate your vulnerability a lot, Alan, because you're also dealing with something that's incredibly hard to accept, right? It's the same issue, obviously very different circumstances, like you said. As a parent, I cannot imagine anything that could activate my deepest fears and my deepest pain as much as, my son being threatened, my son's health being threatened, and so on. I've known that for a long time, that if bad news is going to come, I would so much rather it come with me than with my son, right? It's so much rather. No, absolutely no comparison. So I appreciate your vulnerability a lot, Alan, and I know this was hard for you, that you were exhausted before the meeting tonight, before our workshop. And so a couple of things that come out of this for me that I just wanted to highlight. Often when we see someone who's struggling with accepting reality, as you said, Alan, in our impulse to help, we will try to help by giving advice. We will try to help by trying to help them solve their problem or fix their problem. And sometimes that can be helpful if that's what the person is asking us for. Okay, but that's the key phrase. Sometimes that can be helpful if that's what the person is asking us for. But very often, and this is the part that's missed because of our shoulds, because of our belief systems, because of the pain that we don't want to face and the fear we don't want to face. At least I don't. And over the decades that I've had working with clients, you know, I haven't run into anybody who just can't wait to feel their pain and can't wait to feel their fear, right? We all want to avoid it, and yet we stay stuck when we do so much of the time. So I've learned over time, when I don't know what to do, I just try to be present with the person. I just try to put myself in their shoes. I try to imagine what they're going through. And I found it very helpful to say, gosh, I want to do something to ease your pain, but I don't know what to do. Can you help me with that? That can be one of the most important things to offer someone, rather than offering solutions that really miss the mark for them. And very often what people will say is, God, it means a lot to me for you just to listen and to try to understand what I'm feeling. Very often, that's what has the most value. So there's so many important messages about, especially with a profound loss like Charlene was experiencing with her daughter. It is such a long and painful road to acceptance. It is. It just is. A lot of feelings that are about things that don't matter nearly as much to us, that don't mean nearly as much to us. We don't have to give them a huge amount of power in our life. We don't have to, spend a lot of time on them. We don't even have to talk about them or acknowledge them. But when it comes to things that matter more, this is the kind of process that Charlene went through that I think allows the deepest and most natural, if you want to use that term, kind of integration and acceptance to happen. And obviously, having other people to help with that is a hugely important part of the process. Doesn't need to be a therapist necessarily. It might be a friend, it might be a relative, it might be a sponsor. It could be a lot of different people, but we really need support from other people, but not necessarily direction from other people. We need connection and understanding from other people. So thank you, Alf, so much for sharing all of that. And my heart goes out to you, man. Yeah, you're welcome. Thom.
Yeah, nobody knows what to say in those situations. I've worked with people who lost their children. I have one client who remember telling me, she said, my husband and I we had to comfort everybody who came to our daughter's memorial service. and it's well, we try. What I wrote down here is we try to help by knowing something, and the truth is about acceptance, about my belief about emotional sobriety is acceptance here is that of uncertainty, of not knowing. The wisest people I know are the people, actually I put this in my very first book, the wisest people I know are the people who are the most comfortable with the sentence, I don't know. And if we're not always trying to figure it out, trying to get there. And, and I mean, as human beings, I've said this here before, as human beings, we hate change, and we're most scared of uncertainty. And the punchline to that is what's the only thing that's certain about life is change. And therefore we're the only species on the planet who actually lives in fear of the nature of life. And we do, and it's just one more way, we're weird and human. But I love that whole process, and I love what I love about the chapter, Alan, and your work with them is what you're a great example of what Roger's talking about. What you didn't do is you didn't offer solutions. You didn't, you the best thing I've ever heard anybody say when they're dealing with something that's this heavy is, I mean, the most powerful thing I've witnessed it, where somebody will say, "May I sit with you?" That's it. In other words, may I sit in this space with you? And it's like, if the person wants to talk, they'll talk. It's amazing. It's like, and yeah, and this is the stuff that really matters. Reminds me, Alan, of that workshop that we had done the flyer on, that we didn't do because COVID hit, and the workshop was called "Shit That Matters." I was so proud of the flyer. I designed a flyer because I said to you that day, I just want to do a workshop where we just go into a treatment center and just talk about shit that matters. And you said, okay, well, go ahead, as you will do. You said, go ahead and draw up the flyer. We'll do it. So I called it "Shit That Matters," and we put it there. And then COVID came, and so we all had to stay home. And here we are 4 years later. But anyway, I have a lot of respect for you with the work with this woman, and bless her and her daughter. And how cool is it that she's out there helping other people?
Yeah, it's great, isn't it? Really cool.
Yeah. Because what's one of the things we do? Therapy is many things, but one of my favorite things about being a therapist is we witness people's lives.
Yeah.
We get invited in really close. We get a really close view, and we witness people's lives, the joys and the tragedies and all this other stuff. And it's just a privilege to do. So anyway, thank you, Alan.
Yeah.
Thank you. All right, Thom, why don't you come in and share anything, and then let's open it up for some shares. We got some time tonight.
Yeah, what time we going till?
We can go a little bit over tonight.
Okay, I got a feeling we might get a few hands up. Just really powerful chapter and story, and I have two thoughts on this, and then we'll open it up. One is the let's say the problem. The problem is thinking that life is supposed to be fair, right? But in a situation like that, and what I just went through with my wife and her going through her dad's end of life and his passing, is when she is saying it's not fair, it gains us nothing for me to tell her your problem is that you think that life's supposed to be fair, right? It's that doesn't help, right? What was it Thom said, just sit with that person, right? And and I go, you're right, life's not fair. That's the truth that she's experiencing right now, and that's okay, right? And I think part of what I've learned here through this process is, when those resistances come up for me, and to reality and to the situation, to say, what was my expectation? It doesn't change the hurt, right? But maybe I can course correct along the way, for the next time through. And the other one is that hearing people say, well, God's not going to give you more than you can handle, because that's a tough one to swallow. because I've seen people, get devastated by things which, are really tough. And that, that has potential of creating shame, right? And more appropriately for me is like, well, maybe I can handle it, but I'm going to handle it pretty poorly. I'm going to kick and scream, and I'm going to cry, and I'm going to, blame, and, and I'm going to be angry at God or whatever it might be. Yeah, I good chance I'm going to come out the other side, but that doesn't mean I'm going to handle it with grace and dignity and, and all that stuff. I give myself, permission to, blubber about, the situation and resist. It's okay, and I think any of those absolutes, right? Those absolute messages that we get, and that either we absorbed, it's in the readings, or it's in the or from good-natured people trying to support us. That's where the friction comes in.
Grace and dignity are overrated.
Hell yeah.
Does someone need to believe in God to successfully overcome addiction? Well, the way I like to think about what the program does, it connects us to who we really are. And what does that mean? Well, there's this incredible force in you and I, this growth force. It's the force that moved us from crawling to walking. You wanted to take those first steps. And when you fell, and you fell a lot of times, you didn't let your failures stop you. You picked yourself up, you learned from it. And how many times did you fail before you walked? You failed as many times as you needed to. You see, that force, I call it a biological imperative, a psychological imperative, a spiritual imperative. It's moving you towards wholeness. It's moving you to be what you can be. Just like in the acorn is all the information it needs to become an oak tree. In you is all the information you need to become you. Become a you that can cope with life and to deal with whatever you need to deal with to be okay. And that's what I'll talk about in my new book, The 12 Essential Insights for Emotional Sobriety.